Conference in docket number 23-057-02, DEU's Integrated Resource Plan for plan year June 1st, 2023 to May 31st, 2024. My name is Jacob Richardson, and I'm the PSC's facilitator for this conference. Next, we'll have everyone introduce themselves, and we'll start on this side of the room.
My name is Brandy Robles.
And can you let us know who you're with?
I'm with Dominion Energy.
Thank you.
Matt Bartol, Dominion Energy.
Richard Kaiser with Dominion Energy.
Abby Thomas, Dominion Energy.
Ryan Jameson, Dominion Energy.
Dave Landward with Dominion Energy.
Melinda Cranville, Public Service Commission.
John Delaney, Public Service Commission.
John Harvey with the Commission.
Nick Tingy, Dominion Energy.
Yvonne Huckle, PSC.
Jennifer Clark with Dominion Energy.
Alyssa Walling, Dominion Energy.
Adam Del Toro, Dominion Energy.
Jason McGee, Dominion Energy.
Dan McDonald, Dominion Energy.
Stan Holmes with Utah Citizens Advocating Renewable Energy, UCARE.
Brenda Salter with the Division of Public Utilities.
Patrick Riku, Assistant Attorney General for the Division of Public Utilities.
Jacob Zachary, Utah Office of Consumer Services.
Bela Vostok, OCS.
Eric Gordon with the Division of Public Utilities.
Doug Wheeler with the Division.
Jeff Einfeld with the division.
Kelly Mendenhall with Dominion Energy.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for coming. We may have a few people tuning in on the line, but I haven't heard anyone yet, so we'll go ahead and turn the time over to Dominion now.
Great. Thank you. So it's been a lot of fun the last several months talking about our integrated resource plan. And this is the fifth and final technical conference. And I think all of you have had our IRP for about a month to look at. So basically, I think the format today, I didn't come over here with a pack of people because I like to travel in a pack. We've got all the subject matter experts here who wrote these sections. So I want to thank them all publicly for all the work they put into this document. It's a lot of work. But they are here to answer any questions that you might have as you have read the IRP. So basically, we're just going to go through the 14 sections quickly. I've got one or two slides for each section just to kind of give an overview. And then if you have any questions, just stop us and we can have a discussion. So the first section was the industry overview. We talked about industry trends. We talked about the IRP process, the history of the IRP process, kind of where we're at now. And then we really focused on the heating season review, not only in the document, but in a lot of our technical conferences. It was a particularly challenging winter, as we all know. So we spent a fair amount of time talking about that. Any questions on the industry overview? All right, so far so good. The next section was the customer and gas demand forecast. So our design date for the 2023-2024 IRP period is 1.27 million decatherms. You can see here, there's a nice chart that summarizes not only for the next IRP year, but for several years out in advance what we expect the design day to look like. And transportation usage as well. Any questions on the customer and gas demand forecast?
Just customer on the graph itself.
Yes.
So the 1.27 puts you well below the blue and the red. What are the blue and the red?
Dave, you want to answer that? Or I can answer it. I think the blue and the red is your transportation, isn't it?
The top of the blue is 127.
Yeah. The blue is the 1.27.
Yeah, the top of the blue is 1.27.
So the blue is the 1.27, and then the red is the sales, and then this is what actually occurred. This is your actual send out for the last year. Is that correct, Dave?
Yes.
So just to summarize, green is actual sales send out for the last 5 years. Yellow is actual transportation send out, and then the blue is what we're forecasting the design day would look like for our sales, as well as our transportation.
And the green and the yellow are for your peak actual
Actual,
peak day
right.
of the year.
That's what actually happened, yeah.
But
Highest
on the
send out,
highest day.
highest send out
Highest send out.
for those last 5 years, yeah.
Wasn't last year the highest peak actual ever? Is that right?
Yes. So I believe it was January 30th, does that sound right?
Right.
Or 31st, it was one of those 2 days was
30th.
was the record, the
The
30th, yeah. Record high.
Seared in his memory.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I remember that for a long time.
All right. Any other questions on that? Excellent. Moving right along. System capabilities and constraints. So,
Billy?
yes.
One question before you do go on. Go back one slide.
Absolutely.
Why do you not have any growth for the transportation customers in the future?
Transportation is a pretty, it's not nearly as dynamic as the sales class. I mean, you've got about just under 2,000 customers currently. Most of the growth in the transportation class in years past has been customers moving from the sales class to transportation. That has tapered off. In fact, we've got about 50 or so customers this year that have moved from transportation back to sales. So kind of a net decline. But most of that transportation volume is actually dominated by some, well, a good share of it is electric generation. And there's variability there that can fluctuate year to year. It's moved up and somewhat stabilized, but those customers never share with us what their ongoing plans are, so I generally take a 2-year average, just kind of use a midpoint as a projection of what that electric generation is going to be. Same with the transportation class. If I know there's growth, if I know I've got customers coming or leaving, I can account for those volumes. But it's generally a fairly static class in terms of customer composition and usage. The bulk of the growth is going to be on the sales side, where we're adding customers at a considerable rate every year.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing the high prices we had in the winter this year is maybe causing some transportation customers to switch back. Is that what you're seeing? Is that?
I assume
Yes.
that was the economic impetus for it.
Yeah, I mean, you know, from the presentations Will gave, the first of the month price in January was $50 a decatherm, and we had customers who their entire gas supply, transportation customers, their entire gas supply was locked in at that price. So yeah, I think a lot of them are just decided maybe managing our own gas supply is not the best for our business. So
Do you think there's more customers that will switch before next winter season, or is that already?
it's
process
locked in,
already-
yeah.
it's
So
already locked in?
yeah, so how it works is they have until I think is at the end of February. They have to commit because Will and his group have to lock in gas supply for the next winter and the packages we talked about and so those customers have to commit by the end of February, and then though they switch July 1st. So all those 50 customers you talked about, they've switched this month, and they can't switch again. Well, no, a customer can't switch again until next year. So, yeah. So for this IRP year, we're pretty much locked in with switching.
Thanks.
Yep. Any other questions?
I have one.
Sure.
Those transportation customers, when they switch over to firm, do they typically still behave like transportation customers, or does their usage start to fluctuate?
We assume the same usage profile. So if they were, space heating customers on the sales side, we assume they would behave the same on the transportation side. The only difference is where they're getting their gas from.
Right.
Yeah, so that usage profile carries back and forth to wherever they go.
Thank you.
But I'm trying to think of, do you remember maybe just the types of businesses? I know we had a couple of school districts that switched back, or do you remember any of the others? Were there hotels or grocery stores or?
I don't recall off the top of my head.
Okay.
Abby, do you happen to recall?
It wasn't a huge volume. It was like 1,800 a day, maybe.
so.
Some of them were hotels and,
Yeah.
yeah, and grocery stores, like you're saying, so.
I think the net effect, I calculated, was just under 500,000 decatherms annually that they take with them from transportation over to sales.
Okay.
That sound right? I think that's what I built in, based on their history.
All right. Moving on to system capabilities and constraints. So I believe it was Adam who shared with us when he presented on this, the various areas of our system that are growing and that needed some reinforcement, and we talked about some of those major projects, as well as just long-term planning. And when I say long-term, we're talking decades in advance. And so we have a whole section on that. Yeah, Eric, you have a question on this section?
I do, yeah. The first line under the first bullet,
Yeah.
feeder line systems have adequate capacity. Can we tie that adequate capacity to the previous slide? Is that what we mean by adequate? Or do we mean it's at 99% and 1% more will make it inadequate? Or do we have some 20 or 30% cushion? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, so I believe, Adam, you come up with a kind of a design day from the bottom-up approach, right? Where you look at our system and say, does my system have enough oomph to get me my 1.27?
Right, so if you go to the next slide, so that graph that's included is showing some minimum pressures across the entire system. And we're trying to make sure we keep minimum pressures above 125 in general across the system. So when we say it's got adequate capacity, we're saying there's adequate line pack to make sure we have sufficient pressures to meet all the customers' demands.
So you're not looking to the 1.27, you're saying I have enough pressure capacity in my lines
Right,
to
so
take away whatever I need.
yeah, so the way we build our model is a little different from Dave's model, which we're starting from the bottom up. So we're taking all the customers' billing data and we're creating projections and estimates for how much demand they're going to be using. We're also including all the TS customers, all the transport and sales, all the GS customers, and we're baking that all in for what we consider our peak day. And it lines up pretty close with what Dave comes up with from his top-down approach. So we're modeling very closely that 1.27, and even with it all modeled and we're seeing how the line pack fluctuates throughout the day in our models, we're saying that provides adequate pressures for everybody and capacity.
So on a design day.
On a design
right.
day.
So you would be able to stay above that 125 pounds
Yeah.
on design day.
Yeah, we're
across
talking,
the system.
and we're also talking presently, because obviously the system's going to continue to grow, and that's why we've identified some of these constraints and concerns and where we're going to need to expand and grow a little bit and make improvements to the system.
Yeah. So you've got that same sort, roughly, of cushion as Dave does in his previous slide. Some sort of marginal,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, we also run planning models, like master planning models, to see, how many years until we need to have certain projects done, so we can plan and address for those appropriately. So, yeah.
So your model includes at kind of I don't know what level you call it, a node level or whatever, weather and usage.
Yeah.
And you're able to kind of take all that data in your model and say, okay, let's drop it down to 5 degrees below zero in Salt Lake and see what it does to the system, right?
Right. And we're modeling all of our weather zones at their peak day temperatures simultaneously, and we're assuming
we're gonna be okay.
We're going to be okay for all the firm cell and all that.
Yeah.
So if you didn't do any upgrades, you'd be okay for a while still.
Well, it depends. Depends
where you're at in the system.
And
Oh,
depends.
yeah,
It depends on how.
If you're at the end of the line, that's 125 now.
If
There's areas of the
you look at
system.
West Jordan, it's in a much worse situation than Alta would be.
Right. And there are more localized improvements we can make, which can boost pressures in areas. Some areas require greater significant capital investment, like the Southern System Expansion Project we've been talking about for a while now. Those will require a lot more significant projects to make those continue to provide adequate capacity for those areas.
Yeah, I was just trying to get in my mind's what sort of, what do you call it, comfort?
Kind of how much buffer.
Yeah, buffer we've got, because there's, in the previous slide, there's a good buffer, and wanted to see if, from your point of view, if there's the same sort of buffer of, we got plenty of room, or we're pretty tight.
How well are you sleeping in the winter, Adam? That's what he wants to know.
I'm sleeping just fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Commissioner Harvey.
Is the graph historical or modeled?
This is, so what you're looking at is, this is looking at a peak day.
Yeah,
And this
pressure
is
per
looking at the
hour.
pressure throughout that entire peak day.
Right.
So it's historically, it's just looking at just the history of that day, but not from like a year-to-year basis, if that makes
Right,
sense.
I just wondered if it was a snapshot of the past or your forecast. Is it coming out of the model
Yeah,
or
this
measurements?
is a forecast of the peak day.
So it's a forecast, it's not measured.
Yeah, no, this is not measured. This is what we predict with the models and the inputs, that this is what it would look like if we hit a peak day.
So the measure's probably not quite as bad.
Well, the measured, we do a process where we make sure that the model that we create every year is really close to reality, and we do a thing called model verification.
Sure.
And so we want to make sure that models are a really good predictor. Have we ever measured a peak day? No, we haven't. So that's, that, you know, we feel though this would be an accurate representation of what a peak day would be.
Okay.
And we also assume that all the gas supply is showing up where it's supposed to too, so.
So it sounds like you've done like, I guess what they call like a back cast, where you've taken an actual day, actual temperatures, and put it in the model and see how
Yeah.
close it came to reality.
That's right.
And it does a good job.
Yes, and we actually detail that in the system planning section where we talk about our model verification. So it is in there, and we talk about the accuracy of those models. So.
So the fluctuation that we see throughout the day, when you look at the relative time, is that due to demand, or is that due to temperature? What drives the fluctuations?
Right. It's primarily dependent, well, I mean, this is a twofold answer, but the temperature is what drives demand. Obviously, as we get colder, demand's going to increase. So it makes sense that as we get closer to a peak day, we're going to have lower pressures on that day compared to obviously warmer days. But to answer your question, what's driving that on an hourly basis is the demand. And we've done some studies where we've looked at how does the demand change over time on a given day. And we plug those into our models. And so we know, obviously in the morning, that's when demand's at its peak. I mean, everybody's waking up, they're turning on their showers, they're cooking their food, heating their homes. And then when they leave for the morning, you know, obviously we see kind of a start to recover. You look at the graph there around 10 a.m., you see that pressure starts to recover. The line pack's increasing because the demand has decreased at that time. And so therefore the pressure is increasing. And then in the evening, you see that kind of dip back down because when people come home in the evening, they start to, you know, crank up the furnace again, and, you know, usually they set it to a colder temperature while they're gone, and now they want it warmer while they're home, right? Or they're using other amenities in their home.
And then the 125, that's in industry standard, 125.
I would say that's
Is that above industry standard?
that's part of our standard practice for our system.
How do you compare to the industry?
You know, I don't really know off the top of my head what the like the other distribution gas, you know, business units we have in Dominion, what their minimum pressure is, because they have different kind of pressure systems. For instance, Ohio has a multi-tiered low pressure system. We kind of have just like a lower pressure system, which just runs in the neighborhoods, distribution stuff. And then we have kind of a higher pressure system. And I don't know the history of why we picked 125 pounds as the minimum system pressure, but I believe we want to standardize how we design all our equipment to feed the areas that we run.
Okay, thank you.
And if you want, we can look into the other business units and see what they're...
I'm just curious, you know, how it compares to other distribution company systems. I understand that the systems are different and
Right.
differently. That's just I'm just wondering why you picked 125 PSA.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Yeah. Thank you.
So, Eureka and Santaquin are essentially flat. Is that because they just don't have very many customers yet? in
Yeah.
those service areas?
Great question. Yeah, so Eureka's going to have a pretty stable pressure there because the demand's so low out there. So we're not seeing a ton of pressure variability in the system. So that's why that's pretty flat. As far as Santaquin, also similar thing. There's not as much demand in that area compared to other areas where you would see more pronounced effect from the demand during the peak hour.
I had a follow-up on Yvonne's question for you. So, in terms of 125, from an engineering standpoint, are there things that start to happen at the system if you drop below 125? I mean, do people start running out of gas? I mean, what makes
Right.
125 so magical?
Well, and Dan and Jason are welcome to chime in here as well. But I'll happily, I don't want to take all the heat, but I can happily. Oh, okay.
So this is looking at our high pressure system. Most of our customers are served off of a lower pressure system called intermediate high pressure, which runs typically at 45 pounds. So we have stations called regulator stations that reduce the pressure from high pressure down to that 45 pounds. And so that 125 design pressure is what we designed for the minimum inlet pressure to this regulator stations, and there is a design basis for it because when we size the equipment, the regulators that reduce the pressure, that equipment has greater capacity at greater differential pressures, and less capacity if you were to take the same regulator and only have 55 pounds in and 45 pounds out, a lot less capacity than if you had 125 pounds in. So anyway, the 125 pound basis, which does predate me, was really kind of set based on the design parameter around all the regular stations, and we have hundreds of them that serve basically the majority of our customer base.
And to further answer that too, I mean, if we ever got down to those lower pressures, like Matt's saying, we've designed it for this specific differential. So if we got below that, then that reduces the capacity of those stations, and depending on how much demand is downstream and needed from those stations, we would probably need to, send out people and start doing bypassing stations and other methods to keep the system afloat. Make sure that the typical customer can continue to flow gas. We've never hit situations like that system-wide. It's not something we've ever encountered before, but that's kind of to answer Kelly's question, what would happen to the system?
Yeah.
We would have reduced capacities at those stations, and we would need to accommodate for it and respond accordingly.
All right, thanks. I'm surprised we had a good discussion on this slide. I thought we were just going to blow right through it. Any other questions on this one? All right, so I believe it was Curtis that was filled in and gave us a very good explanation of all the big projects we've got planned for the next few years. Any questions on any of these projects? Jason knows them all backwards and
I
forwards.
brought a cheat
The
sheet.
details.
I brought my section of the IRP just in case. So.
All right, last chance. And then part of the distribution action plan is also just talking about our IHP program. And then I think it was last month we had a fairly in-depth discussion on our infrastructure replacement, as well as our rural expansion programs or communities that we're working on as well. Any questions on any of these items?
Can you give us an update on the Mountain West?
Actually, I'm going to pitch that one to Matt. You might be the guy for that one.
Sure, what's this Mountain West?
This is Mountain West pipeline transition.
Sure. So we are kind of in ongoing negotiations with Mountain West in regards to many of our interconnects. So historically, our prior affiliate owned the interconnect, but we provided the operations to run them. Because these are typically these regulator stations that do reduce the pressure, feed directly into our system. So we're currently, and this has taken a bit, negotiating with them to purchase some of those assets. It will require FERC approval. So they will need to file with FERC for abandonment by sale. So that'll take probably 6 or 7 months. Kind of budgetary wise though, we've already kind of accounted that in our future capital budgets. So what we've previously submitted, there'd be no change for that. But we're currently in negotiations with them.
I assume that would change your manpower in the control room.
So wouldn't necessarily change manpower because these are stations that we've historically done the maintenance on and just billed back to our prior affiliate. So a lot of these stations are up in Wyoming, so we wouldn't necessarily need another technician or two to do the maintenance. We're historically done it. In regards to the control room, we did have a shared gas control with Mountain West. That's been split for over a year now, so we have our own gas control that manages the gas on our system.
So why are you considering the acquisition of these? I mean, what's the purpose?
Yeah, it's probably driven by a couple of reasons, but historically we were obviously one company, and it was a little less complicated to have them own it and have us operate it. But since these are kind of critical for our operations, if there's any pressure problems, it directly impacts our customers. Having us do the maintenance and doing the lockup test kind of from a compliance standpoint, now puts kind of them in the position of having to provide oversight. They have to be there when we do all that work. It's just a lot cleaner, and Dan, you can jump in here if you'd like, a lot cleaner for us to kind of own and operate the equipment that's serving our customers.
So will that then lower the rate that you have to pay them for their transportation service, or?
We're looking at some offsets to, from an O&M standpoint, to kind of net out. There's the interconnect points, and these are often small type taps from what you might call a farm tap or a bird cage to some medium-sized stations. Some of the offsets we're looking at is historically we've ownerized in Colville, and they've been charging all that back to us. It makes a lot of sense to centralize odorization in Colville, and so we're looking at that as potential some of like an O&M offset. So we net, our customers kind of net out to zero.
Any other questions on the action plan? All right, integrity management. So Richard, I think a few technical conferences ago, shared with us the plan, the company's plan for integrity management going forward, and I think there's a pretty in-depth write-up in the IRP on it. Any questions on integrity management? Got off easy.
I'm okay not
Covered it. You covered it last time. No more questions. All right, environmental review. We talked a lot about reducing our CO2 intensity, and I think this is not only just talking about here in Utah, but I think it's across the Dominion footprint. So we talked about a lot of the things that we're doing. I think for us here in the state, our big focus is leak reduction and energy efficiency programs. So you can see kind of where we're at, the trend, and the things we're working on. Any questions on this section? Yeah.
Maybe you'll get to this later, but I was wondering about the methane research and evaluation analyses. Where is scope 3 in terms of progression?
Yeah, so scope 3, Mike, you help me here. Scope 3 would be your end-use customers, right?
The customers and their emissions. I think that's, my understanding is I think that plan is still kind of being developed, that we're addressing scope 1 and scope 2 at this point, but
yeah.
I guess I was more interested in the emissions from the suppliers to your stations.
Okay.
That's part of scope 3. I think that the end user is part of it as well, but I think scope 3 had 3 components to it.
Yeah, so from our suppliers, there's a big discussion on responsibly sourced gas, I believe, in the IRP. So we have about 50% of our supply comes from an affiliate called Wexpro. So Wexpro is working on, and actually, Nick, you're probably, are you well versed enough to speak about what you're doing to reduce methane emissions at your wellhead, or you want me
That's
just
Casey.
to? Okay,
That's
Casey. Yeah. So WexPro is working on reducing and mitigating those methane emissions at their wells. And then you've got a kind of a industry-wide push for responsibly sourced gas. So that's where we're having the actual producers go out, certify wells, do you know, a certain list of things that will help to mitigate methane reductions. And then they can be certified as well. So there are a number of third-party certifiers. Was it One Canary? I'm trying to remember the names of those. What is it?
Trustwell.
Trustwell's
Through the Canary
one.
Project, yeah.
The Canary Project, yeah.
There's 3 of them, I think.
Yeah, the challenge we have, and we have suppliers, and Abby, you may want to jump in if you know anything about the suppliers.
So each year when we put out our RFP for gas for the winter, we ask for responsibly sourced gas proposals as well, but they're always a little bit more money, and we aren't allowed to spend a little bit more money, so our model never picks them. But it's more available, it's out there, we're interested in buying it, but thus far, it's not something that we're able to do.
Yeah, so the way that the statute reads here in Utah is the natural gas we provide needs to be lowest reasonable cost. And so we're allowed to take into account safety, reliability, but right now the way the statute's written, environmental benefits are not, can't be considered. So I think, what is
Out
it?
there, it's
Is
in
it
our
a
model,
nickel,
it's an
nickel or 10 cents more
It
for
depends.
responsibly sourced
The
gas?
price on, the difference in price has gone down a
Okay.
lot in the last 3 years. We'll get, and you just don't know what you're getting. We get the same offer for the same gas at the same point, regular and responsibly sourced certified, and that's a few cents more, right? So we may be getting it, we just aren't told we're getting it, you know, but we can't right now pay to get those certificates.
So I mean, there's a big discussion industry-wide about how we advance this, and it is a bit of a chicken and egg issue, because if the utilities, most states have statutes that wouldn't allow you to pay more for environmentally sourced gas or responsibly sourced gas. But then there's a discussion of, well, is it better to kind of attack this from the federal side and create federal laws that require producers to meet all these requirements? And yeah, their costs will go up, but if everyone has to comply with these federal requirements, then you know, we're gonna pay for it because everybody's doing it.
It's a level playing field.
Exactly. So that's kind of the I guess the tug of war right now. But yeah, it's definitely something we're involved in. I know Southern Company is working with I think NARUC on a white paper on this issue.
I think Dominion Corporate has spent some of its own money to buy some responsibly sourced gas back east
In Virginia.
in Virginia.
Yeah.
So
But I think they may
definitely
have
in on the
statute.
conversations trying to figure it out, but it's just not quite happening yet.
But I think in that situation, wasn't it the lowest cost?
I don't know, or if the difference came from not ratepayers.
Yeah.
So is WexPro who has the ultimate responsibility, GHG responsibility? WexPro for pulling it out of the ground, or Dominion for using it?
Ultimate
Are they held
responsibility to
accountable
who?
as well? WexPro?
Yeah, I mean, they would report it as part of their emission profile. Yeah.
Yeah, and specifically on that point, I mean, WexPro's major source of emissions as a producer has been pneumatic controllers on the wellheads that use basically gas pressure to control measurement valves. And so those are all being switched out for electric right now, and that really is the biggest impact that we can have on emissions other than from compressor stations and stuff that are regulated, so.
And when you say electric, is it mostly solar panels or?
Yeah.
Okay.
A lot of it's remote.
Yeah.
they did a presentation year and a half ago on that.
That's right.
Here.
I don't know if that answered your question or.
Yeah, that's very helpful.
Yeah.
I had another question too on the CO2 equivalent. So it's locked in terms of your calculations until the next IRP. Is that right,
Yes.
or is it periodically updated, or who feeds you information on that?
I'm hoping, and I didn't ever hear anybody get on the phone. Is Glenn Johnson on the phone? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I can if you want to give me your contact information
Yeah,
after.
I'll do
I can.
a follow-up. And the last one had to do with the carbon offsets, the carbon right program.
Yeah.
Is that appropriate to deal with here?
Sure.
So is that system-wide for Dominion, or does each state or does each Dominion entity calculate for itself or establish its own carbon offsets program?
Each entity, yeah. So we have 3 gas LDCs, one here in Utah and then Wyoming, one in Ohio and one in North Carolina. Those 3 utilities all have their own program that's been approved by the commission, and they're all a little bit different. So we have the carbon offset program in Utah. We're actually currently proposing it in Wyoming. And then I think the North Carolina one is more of a hybrid of carbon offsets and renewable natural gas credits, right, or attributes.
Very, very small amount of renewable natural gas.
In Ohio, I think they're working on one, but they don't have one approved yet, right?
True.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Yeah.
What's been the uptake in Utah on that?
3,000
So-
on the. I'll let you know the numbers better than I do.
Yeah, so we finished 2022 with about 3,000 participants in Green Therm, and the renewable natural gas program, and then about 1,000 participants in Carbon Right. And so Green Therm has existed, I think, been out and available for customers for about 2 years, and we just passed a year on Carbon Right. So.
Thanks.
Am I reading that table right? It looks like your greenhouse gas intensity is getting worse.
Yeah, that's what the table says.
Or is that?
I would agree, and I wish we had someone who could answer that question.
That's not you.
Sorry, I had someone who was supposed to be here to answer questions, but I guess.
Yeah, well, I'll just take that really
Yeah.
quick, and I'm not the expert, I'm just gonna throw that out there, but oftentimes when we do our calculations, it is driven by the miles of main we have, the amount of assets we have in the ground, and the number of customers, the number of meter sets, because each mile of main or each meter set is attributed to a certain greenhouse gas emission through leakage, through fittings, that sort of thing. So just by the nature of us adding customers and adding assets, those things go up.
Good answer. It's the best we can do right now. Any other questions on this section?
But this is a total, this is a rate.
All right. Purchase gas. So, I actually think this technical conference on purchase gas is probably one of the most well-attended we've ever had. I do want to give you an update. So, as you know, last winter was brutal. We had an under collection of $519 million as of the end of February. As of the end of June, we're at $407 million. So, and these are months, shoulder months without a lot of volume. So that's really good news. And as you can see, the forwards are looking, well, actually these are actuals, aren't they? But the forwards are looking much better than last winter. So we're hoping they can hold. We did just fix some more contracts today, right? At what price? I can't tell you the price because it's confidential, but it's at
A good price.
a good price, we think. In fact, I think we might be able to say it's less than last year's price. Is that safe to say?
I don't know.
I believe so, yes.
Compared to what?
I'm just saying the fixed price contract last year.
Which one?
Ask your attorney over here. What you can say.
There's a number of them.
I think I have,
We're,
yeah.
we're watching the forwards, and if they go down a little bit, we're trying to lock some stuff in, and if they go up, we're waiting. So they went down a little bit this week, we locked in a little bit more.
And that's all we'll say on that. Any questions on purchase gas? All right. So cost of service, this is what we're talking about a little earlier, Wex Pro. Nick came in earlier this year and talked a little bit about the drilling plan. And we do a pretty good thorough write-up on that in the IRP. Any questions on the cost of service gas?
Yeah, I do.
Because Nick wore a jacket, so I'm glad that he gets to answer a question.
Thanks. It's my recollection that the forecasted demand from Wexpro has been quite different than the actual production.
Well, maybe, I'm not sure Nick can answer that question.
Sorry, Nick. What should I ask?
No, that's a good question. That's been your understanding, is that?
Forecasted demand versus
Actual production.
Okay.
Forecasted
To the gates, I
production.
guess, is maybe accurate.
Lower or higher, or?
Production, actual has been higher than estimated.
In our drilling program, yes.
Yeah. So are we changing the forecast, or are we adjusting something, or do we expect that to continue?
Frankly, I wouldn't expect that to continue, mainly because the risk profile of wells is changing. So, it was fortunate, but I think ultimately where we're at now is we're trying to be as accurate as possible, and the risk profile is changing a bit, so I wouldn't think that we'd exceed it.
Good. Any other questions on cost of service or Wex Pro? Okay, gathering, transportation, storage. I think one of our meetings we talked about our contracts going forward. The one notable contract is the Spire storage contract we were able to secure. Goes into effect not this winter heating season, but next winter heating season. So we're pretty happy about that, especially in light of what happened last winter. Then a couple of, I guess one contract extension with Mountain West, and then we've got most of our other contracts are in place for a while before they need renewal. Yeah.
Do you need to get more transportation capabilities with the Spire contract?
I don't think so.
What do you mean with the supplier contract?
No, now that you've got storage, do you need transportation
So
to
that's right,
connect to?
where Rickman Creek was,
Yeah.
right? So we already have transportation to and from there.
With the old.
Just with our 241 contract and over Mountain West and Overthrust Connect right there. So,
Yeah, so you have enough.
yeah,
you know,
very
line
convenient.
work.
Yeah.
So, in other words, on a winter day, instead of getting gas in the location from a field or from a marketer, you get it from storage and have plenty of capacity.
What quantity is that contract for? Can you say?
Randy? I don't remember.
2 BCF, I believe.
Okay, that's what-
Per day though?
Total storage of the in and out, I'm not sure.
Yeah, how much can you get out in one day?
The details of that are in there.
They're in there.
I remember reading it, yeah. Like depends on what percentage full the
Yeah.
storage is.
If I said it, it would be wrong, so. Yeah, it goes into effect April
22,000 a
1st.
day of withdrawal capacity.
Yeah, Kelly said winter, it goes in April 1st, so you can fill it all summer, right? And then it'll be full come next heating season in the year.
Thanks for looking that up for me.
Yeah. Any other questions on gathering, transportation, storage? Yes, Commissioner Harvey.
So the second to last point there under the firm peaking services, it says contracts are in place for each heating season through February 24th. Isn't there just one heating season between now and February 24th? I just was curious if there's a typo or if we're just excited about having a contract for 1 year.
We're just excited.
I think it's a typo, isn't it? I mean, I think we're meaning to say,
Slides,
what?
Kelly. You made the
I didn't make the headlines.
I think what's intended to say there is we have peaking contracts in place with both Mountain West Pipeline and Kern River, so for each of our transportation service providers, perhaps.
There you go.
Are they only 1 year?
This might be the last year, but they are.
Oh, yeah,
more
that
than
is, that
one.
is what it means, is I think they expire on February 24th. So last year, this would have made sense. This year doesn't seem like it makes sense, but it really does make sense, because we're gonna have to renew these contracts, I think, in upcoming winter heating seasons. Okay, so last time, or when we talked about the LNG facility, Dan kind of walked us through the process, and you probably remember this slide. The reason why I put this slide up here is we've had kind of a hiccup with the liquefaction process, and so I just want to kind of show you the process so you know what I'm talking about. And I will turn the time over to Dan just to give an update on kind of the filling and where we're at operationally on the facility.
Sure. Yeah, so last time we spoke in April, we had just started up liquefaction again for the season. And typical liquefaction season is going to run about 5 months, so April to October. Be ready for vaporization at that point. So we did, as Kelly mentioned, we had a hiccup with our nitrogen refrigeration system. We had somewhat of a catastrophic failure on a critical piece of equipment. So that equipment was sent back into the original manufacturer, repaired, and sent back on site. And we actually resumed liquefaction last Friday. Got fully ramped up as of yesterday. So looking forward, we do anticipate still some minor outages as we go through this season. It's still a new plant. There's still bugs that we need to work out. But at this point, it's looking like we're going to be about 80% full by the end of November. You can see on the graph down there below, we have an optional filling period there after December 1st, depending on pricing, but at this point, we're counting on the 80%. And lastly, vaporization, we do plan on some pump testing in the fall, probably early fall, to ensure that we have the send-out capability.
Thank you. And this is under warranty, right? It's a new facility, so it's on their dime. Commissioner Harvey, you have a question?
Yeah, and I should remember this, and I apologize, but what's the actual capacity at 100%? I'm just thinking back to our second or third slide when it said the peak day was the 1.27 decatherms. What's the capacity of this?
So true 100% would be 16.2 million gallons.
And how does
Decatherms?
gallon?
Is that 1.2?
Gallon to decatherm, I couldn't.
Remember what it is?
It's
Can't remember
1.2.
that conversion.
It's 120,000 a day for 8 days, right?
Right, I think the question you were asking was kind of like our total send out on a peak day.
Well, I'm just curious how what's the capacity of this compared to the total send out, and then what's the daily distribution
120,000, is that the right number? Decatherms per day?
150,000.
150, oh.
On vaporization.
Even better.
Yeah.
And that compared to the 1.2 decatherms?
Which would be 1.2 million decatherms versus 150,000 decatherms. So it's about
Roughly over 12%
Yeah,
of a peak day you could
Yeah.
do with this.
yeah. And we could do it for
10
is it
days?
8 days or
8
8
days.
So 10% for 8 days. Okay, thanks.
Kelly, Glenn Johnson's on the phone but can't go off mute.
Who's that?
Glenn's on the phone, but he can't unmute, apparently.
Oh,
So
thank you. Do we have direction for Glenn on how to unmute?
I don't see him on the phone.
Click on view.
Do you want to just call him? Let's just get him on speaker and ask him the question.
Well, do you want to finish and then we can go back if
Yeah, or
he's right there, right there. Him? Oh.
It's locked though.
oh yeah, there it is. We're trying to unmute you, Glenn. There we go. Oh, there he is. Hey, try to talk.
hear me?
Yeah, perfect.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
All right.
Awesome, thanks for joining us. So we're gonna go back, because we had a couple questions.
Yes, on the environmental part, yes.
Yeah. Actually, do you remember your question? You just want to ask it? And,
Sure.
Or you want to see the slide? I don't know that it mattered. Okay.
So one question was, I guess the first question had to do with the status of Scope 3 on methane, dealing with the methane emissions, particularly with the focus on the sourcing, I guess mostly from WexPro. I just wanted to find out how Scope 3 is proceeding.
I think it was well answered by my colleagues earlier on that, and I think that, if we're talking about the responsibly sourced gas question, is that your question, or is it more just in general for Scope 3 emissions from that would be the WexPro production emissions?
Yeah, I'm just thinking in the overall system, whatever is being emitted, whatever is escaping into the atmosphere through the whole process. It sounds like DEU has it under control when you get it. But what about the supplies, the extraction, and the transportation of the product to DEU?
Right. Okay. Sure. In terms of supply, we have our long-term net zero goals as a corporation, which does include production from WexPro and the assets which then transport that gas within our system to arrive within the EU. The principal things for methane emissions and other greenhouse gas emissions involve the pneumatic controllers, which we do have a project ongoing now to replace all of our gas pneumatic controllers with solar powered units. Also, there are emissions from compressors that are in the system, gathering compressors. That's a stickier and thornier problem because most of our assets are in areas where there is no electric service. Therefore, the option to go to an electrically powered compressor is very, very limited, if not impossible. But we are currently studying some potentials to reduce that and minimize it. On the other side of things, with our production, we do complete wells using what's been termed as green completion techniques, which is to minimize releases of methane or natural gas when drilling and completing wells, and also when it is necessary to conduct a blowdown on wells or in pipelines. We have for the last 3 years been installing and are continuing to install gas recovery units, which can capture a large portion of the gas for blowdowns and then allow that to be either returned back to a well or into a pipeline for conveyance.
Is there a document, Glenn, that has the progression of Scope 3? I think it runs out decades, where the milestones are identified.
I can't speak to the particular milestones over the next several decades, but we do intend, and we're committed as a company to be at net zero for greenhouse gas emissions for all scopes, 1, 2, and 3, and limited in scope 3, in this case for natural gas, to the gas that we've been talking about, to reach that milestone by 2050. And that's across the board in our entire corporation, both our natural gas operations and with our electric generation operations.
So one question you asked is this data constantly being updated? In this document, it's not. I mean, once we file it, it won't be updated. We only file this once a year. But Glenn, and then there was kind of a follow-up you had, like how often is this?
Yeah, and
was
what are the sources? In other words, do you get updates from the EPA or any other entity that's, I mean, it's a dynamic now. So I'm just wondering who's feeding you information to update the CO2 equivalent?
You know that one?
Yeah, there are a couple of things in play there. First of all, we are subject to federal greenhouse gas reporting requirements, and we do, under the greenhouse gas reporting rule, report on our emissions of greenhouse gases for the entities that are subject to the rule. Now, with that being said, we also have a corporate greenhouse gas inventory, which is actually more comprehensive than the federal requirements for greenhouse gas reporting. The information we are providing to you in the IRP comes from our corporate greenhouse gas inventory, because it's also, apart from the EPA mandated information, it's also including information on releases from things like some auxiliary combustion equipment or meters or pipeline dig-ins. These are items that are presently not required by the federal reporting standards. So we're actually giving you our best estimates of what our greenhouse gas emissions are. We are using the federal calculation methodology for all the assets that have that defined at the federal level. If it's an asset that doesn't have a federal methodology for it, then we may be using industry protocols or international protocols for running those calculations. Or if we have some, in a few limited cases, some company-specific calculations where there is no other calculation protocol industry-wide or government-wide that's available.
Thank you. I think the other question you answered, or was answered on the carbon offsets and who determines, and it is the independent entities.
Yeah.
And then I think the last was Baylor's point on the seeming like an upward trend in intensity.
Yeah, so I don't know if you heard
There
that.
are two,
Go ahead.
yeah, there are two things at play there. When looking at an intensity, we're looking at both an emission side and a throughput side. So small variances in throughputs can influence a emission side of things. One of the main contributors to the quantity of emission on our side is compressor combustion gases from compressors, and then also the miles of pipeline. There are, at the federal level at EPA, there's an emission factor dependent on the miles of your pipeline and the material of construction of the pipe. You simply take an emission factor and apply it to the number of miles. So that's just kind of fixed. Whether we've got a leak there or not, or even more, it's based on that, and it's really the best and only available factor we have for that. In terms of the trend upward, I will say that between 2020 and 2021, there was in the emission factors for meters a small increase in that emission factor from the federal government. And actually, as of last Thursday, EPA signed a proposed regulation that won't come into effect for at least another 6 months, but it's also going to be adjusting these emission factors. So future information we report will be reflecting as the science evolves for reporting emissions.
Thank you.
Thanks, Glenn. Appreciate it.
And I just one sure thing. And just one final thing, if I may, just to keep in perspective. For example, for 2019, when we see 0.0008 metric tons per million BTU, that works out to about 1 3/4 pounds of greenhouse gas equivalents per million BTU, and at 0.0011, we're talking at roughly 2.5 pounds. And I'm not trying to belittle it, but for me, it's helpful to put it into a unit that I can think in.
Yeah, thank you.
I have one more question. So are these numbers typical for other LDCs? I mean, is this just what we would see if we looked at other gas companies?
That's an excellent question, but I don't know the answer to that myself.
I can tell you from data I've seen, I think our system is a little tighter, and I think part of that is because, we don't have we are on the East Coast, don't have pipes from the 1800s. When I compare our loss unaccounted for to peers across the country, we seem to be lower, and I think a lot of that is just age of system. So
newer pipes,
yeah, tighter, better construction practice. As we know, we've heard it a million times. 1970 was kind of a magical year where construction practices improved, and a large portion of our system was constructed after that. So I think comparatively, these would be pretty good, or lower than average.
I don't know if you've seen the Dominion Energy Climate Report goes out yearly.
Yeah, we do have a
I don't know if you've had that.
sustainability report.
It's very, very detailed. If you can't find it, let someone know. But
Yeah.
it would have a lot
If
of
you
stuff
Google
in
it,
there.
it'll pop right up. Any other? Yeah, Commissioner Harvey, you have a question?
Yeah, so thinking back to some of the earlier discussions, we were talking about the cost of the gas, when it was certified versus not certified.
Yeah.
Hearing now that there's this commitment at the corporate level, for 2050, that would suggest either there has to be significant changes in the cost differential, or there has to be legal changes in order
Right.
to meet that, right?
Right, exactly, yeah. Is kind of the tug of war I was talking about. Either the producers begin to do it on their own, or the utilities drive them to do it, but at the end of the day, that's, yeah. Yep. All right, sorry for going back here. And I think any other questions on the LNG facility? Oh, we've got lots of questions.
Sorry. So you're kind of betting that November's not a cold month to get it 80% full by the end of November. Is that accurate?
Yeah, well, we're betting that we would be able to fill all of, and that prices are not
Prices
crazy
are
in
good,
November.
demand's not high.
Yeah, I mean.
They
you
can
wanna
be
add
pretty
anything to
high,
that?
and we can still do it. We only need about 9,000 a day to go in there.
Oh,
So
okay. So
you don't need a
demand-
lot of space. Yeah.
Could
It'd
have
be
to
more if
real
prices
cold
were
weather.
high and you decided not to, or very cold, you'd slow down for a few days here or there. But
I see, okay. And regarding that part that failed, is there some sort of compensation that the manufacturer has to, because I'm thinking the customers were paying for that LNG plant, the asset and the return, and through no fault of their own, it was unavailable to them for that certain time period. Is there some sort of repercussion from the manufacturer that you're able to go after, or what are the company's plans for those months that it was essentially not
I mean,
functioning?
So under the contract, I
Sounds
think
like
if
Jennifer.
there were, I think if there were real harm, we would consider remedies. I think what we're pursuing right now is remedying the part that wasn't functioning properly. And we've been fortunate that we didn't have greater consequences as a result of that. But beyond just making sure we've got it up and running, we've exercised the warranty, I'm not sure that we've done more beyond that. And Eric, I think that's largely because I'm not sure that we've suffered real harm beyond that to this point. But TBD.
Can I just right here, it's a technical conference, and I'm just warning folks that we should keep it at a technical level and not get into legal issues. That would be great.
I'm wondering about this part, if it's such a critical piece of equipment, is there a lesson to be learned from what failed, or is this a off-the-shelf part that that wasn't vetted properly? Is that something?
Yeah.
Dan?
I was gonna say I could take
Flip
that
a
one.
coin.
Yeah, so we're definitely looking into the root cause. We're pouring over the root cause analysis, and there are spares that have been procured and will be arriving so that this same thing does not occur again.
Okay.
We talked about Adam sleeping really well. Dan is not sleeping. Yeah.
My question kind of related to Eric, but as far as challenges or claims against the contractor, they're repairing the facility under warranty, so there's no cost there. But there would be a cost to ratepayers because you're now filling in December versus filling in April through October, when prices are substantially lower. Is there any claim that you could make against the company for a price difference to fill that tank?
I believe that sounds like a legal question, and so I'm just going to shelve that. And if we decide to make a claim against the manufacturer for lost gas costs, we will let you know.
Well, and the other thing that I would add is we're doing everything we can to mitigate any impact that there will be on customers. And I can't speak with knowledge about whether there have been or have not been, but as you can see from the chart, our intention is to fill it during the filling season. And TBD on that little hash mark space, and it will be partially dependent on pricing. And so whether there has been an impact on customers or not, at this point, I think that's a little speculative and hard to know.
Yeah.
I mean, to be very frank, we've managed this as best we can, and we've managed it in a way that we think minimizes or eliminates the impact on customers. And our hope is at the end of the day, when everything is up and running, the customers are no different. The customers are still neutral. But you know, keep asking the questions, and we'll keep you up to date to the best we can. So far, so good, is what I will say. How would you feel about that, Dan?
Yeah.
Because this was supposed to be finished last year, wasn't it? And filled?
Not filled, but
Not
finished.
filled,
It was
finished,
finished
and it
last
was.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, remember, in April is when these problems started to arise, and
Yeah, the
again,
plan was always to begin filling. In fact, you came in, I think the
Yeah.
technical conference is the end of April, right? And the plan was to begin filling in April because that's when prices were down. So in essence, we've lost May, June, and a week of July, right?
Right, and current projections are we'll be 80% of the way there, even if we're not able to continue into the winter months.
But we will, yeah,
But if we are, we
we'll keep various reports. We'll continue to give updates on where we're at.
Or Doug, just call us,
Okay.
ask us how it's going.
Okay.
We'll let you know.
All right, any more questions that are not legal related to LNG? Sustainability. I feel like we already talked about this, but,
I'm gonna say it was in the wrong order.
so this is a good summary of just, various programs and initiatives that we're working on. Alyssa came, I believe, in April and talked about our hydrogen blending program down in Delta. And then, you know, we've talked about a lot of these programs already. But there's a good write-up on all of it in the integrated resource plan. Energy efficiency. Okay, so last week, Commissioner Harvey asked a question about the RIM, and I completely made up an answer, and I was right. So,
You're sort of right.
the question was, why does the RIM seem to be trending up? The ratio's getting better over time, and I thought it was probably because the avoided gas cost was higher, and Mike confirmed that for me. So that's the cause. So,
Well, as long as we're bragging.
what's that?
I will note that the benefit cost is the highest on the home energy in terms of the 1 point whatever, so I was right too.
We're all patting ourselves on the back. So yeah, any questions? I think you're all fairly familiar with our energy efficiency programs. We have the quarterly advisory council meetings. There's a very good write-up. Any questions on energy efficiency? And Mike come over, made a special trip.
I'll just give a reminder. So we run these results for the IRP in two different ways. We run the current year's budget through the send out model, and then we also run it through our cost effectiveness model, and those tie out again. So
great.
I will just put in a plug to Commissioner Harvey's point. The energy comparison report, the success there, I will say, is attributable to the fact that we developed that program in house. So it's quite a bit more cost effective.
Another pat on the back.
That's myself.
I picked out my own shirt today.
All right, last slide. Final model results. So you can see on a design day where we're getting our gas supply from. This is a chart you see. I think this is what we call the birthday cake slide, right?
The supply stack.
Oh, you like to call it the supply stack. Okay. This is the supply stack for those of you who are in the know. Any questions on our sources of design day? Yeah, Doug.
Is it based on how you use the system? Or what the order of these? Specifically, I'm worrying about base load purchases. I mean,
So base load purchases we get every day all winter, and we've already signed up for those.
okay.
So it is then. So you're saying, what he's saying is, this is the priority of how you would use it on any given day, right?
Okay.
So we have to use these because these are
We're paying
coming.
for the base load whether we use it or not.
Okay.
Wex Pro, same thing.
Okay.
And we'll pull everything we can out of storage, assuming cost is high because it's a very cold day. And then we have these peaking contracts that we pay a little bit of money every day, and they reserve the gas for us. And we call, and if we call, they deliver it. So then we call them the peakers, and then we'll buy the spot as the difference.
But based on priority.
Yep. And if any of that does not show up, and we planned it to, that is when you would turn LNG on. You would never plan LNG into your peak day. That's your backup.
Do you have a plan of when and how you will use LNG?
When gas control says you don't have enough gas.
Okay.
Very end of the season, it may become a different discussion if we have to cycle some and things work out, but the intent is to not plan to use it.
It just sits there.
In our plan for the week, right?
Okay.
Yep.
So it's not necessarily, it's not necessarily a price thing, it's more on reliability.
The more of, this guy said he was bringing you 50 today, and that 50 did not show up.
Okay.
Can you use that with the cycling of the 30% that you need to do every year? Can that be planned into
Yeah, and we,
purchases?
that's when we would do it later in the season.
No.
If it's starting to get warm, we think the threat of real cold is past, then we would then it would become a financial decision a little bit.
But I assume from the not birthday cake chart,
Supply stack.
supply stack, that the aquifers are more expensive than clay basin.
We just rely on clay basin first because it's more, but.
Oh, because of the
And clay
volume.
basin, we have to schedule first because other people also try to come out of clay basin. With us being the only customer of the aquifers, we aren't gonna get scheduled down there if we don't plan it as early.
Okay. I thought with the location, it'd be quicker.
More is scheduling priority, but they're pretty similar.
But you're right, the aquifers, the Colville are a lot closer than Clay Basin.
Yeah, that's much more, we can call Mountain West and say turn them on, and we aren't as subject to the nominations and all of that because we are the only customer there. Their gas control now is moving to Houston, Mountain West, so it's gonna get a little harder to do, but
They should sell you that asset as well, since you're the only customer.
I thought they should sell us Colville.
Really cheap though. Really cheap.
Everything down.
Well, we already paid for it as customers.
Get there.
Decades ago.
questions? All right, we made it. We made it on time. We made it early.
Early, time refund.
All right, if there are no other questions, we'll go ahead and conclude the tech conference. Thank you everyone for attending today.
Thank you.